Hello. Welcome to Chili Grits Podcast. I am Reverend Monica Bowman.
And I am Aisha Francis.
And this is our second episode of Chili Grits Podcast. It's the podcast that takes all things Southern sayings and really examine them around how they set people up for success.
That's right. We're two Southerners who made our way to the hub in around 2005. And so this is our opportunity to bring some of the South to y'all.
Yes, because, we moved here, but we never let go of our Southern roots, right? They're still here, still holding on, and they've really enriched our lives. And maybe people don't realize it. It enriched theirs too. They just don't know it. So that's what this podcast is about.
They don't know it yet.
They don't know it yet.
For those of you, we hope some of you listened to episode 1. If you didn't, go back and listen to it. We are adding on a new feature. This time we have video.
We have video,
and
yes.
audio.
And audio.
So we want to thank CCTV for the space to make this fun. I think dream seems like a reach, but
it was our dream, right?
Yeah, well,
we
true.
did.
That's
and it took us a while to get here, right? Because we are both extremely busy women, with children and careers and entrepreneurial ventures.
Yes.
Y'all, we got a lot going on.
So we're bringing this intention to fruition.
Yes. And I think that's worth celebrating.
It is. Here we are, January 2023, starting the year off saying, look, there's some things that have been on the to-do list for quite a long time, our shared to-do list and our individual to-do list, and we're going to make it happen.
We're going to make it happen. On the first episode, rather, Aisha talked about, we were like, maybe we should write a book or we should do that. But this is like the one thing out of that list of things we discussed that manifested. So yes, we're excited to be here.
We're starting here. So the way that this works is we share phrases that really permeated our upbringing, and we're bringing that to you all to kind of interrogate the saying and how it has really influenced our lives and our leadership journey. So today's saying is brought to us by Monica.
Yes.
And so what is the saying of the day?
Yes. So the saying of the day is, it's really reflective of a person that grew up on the Bayou, right? By the Gulf Coast. And so the saying is, you eat the fish and you take out the bones, or spit out the bones rather, when you are in conversation or you're hearing things from other people. So I grew up with that saying, baby, eat the fish, take out the bones. That's how it would be said to me. And it depended on the circumstance, right? Sometimes it could be used in the beginning before you enter into a conversation as a disclaimer, right? Like, okay, whatever I'm about to say, eat the meat, spit out the bones, or eat the fish part, or spit out the bones. Or it could be said afterwards when maybe things are getting a little tense in the conversation. And then they'll say, well, just eat the meat, spit out the bones, right? So it was really contextual, but it was something that I grew up with, and it just stuck with me all of my life. And as we were preparing for this podcast, I was trying to figure out, okay, where did this saying come from? And initially, I really couldn't find a particular place. But then I did another quick search and discovered that it is connected to some biblical sayings, right? That in the book of Romans, or New Testament part of the Bible, there are these moments when they were giving parables or examples to the new followers of Christ, and it was used as an example as it relates to how to be in conversation or be in relationship, or how to receive information as it relates to this new emerging which now is a religion. But at the time, it was just this new movement that was taking place after the death of Christ. So there you go. It has connection to theological implications
Yeah.
and a part of who I am, because I am Reverend Bowman. So it was really interesting, like full circle moment for me, recognizing that some of this comes back to this intersection of how sometimes these biblical terms move from inside the walls of a particular church and then extends out into secular society and culture without people even realizing that is happening. So I thought that was really interesting and fascinating.
It is, and it recalls, I think, as well, the fact that the biblical culture was very much a seafaring culture, and there's so many connections to and references to being fishers of men.
Absolutely.
In terms of discipleship and that kind of thing. So
absolutely. And it was a symbol that is used, and even today you see the little
fish.
Sign, the fish,
That's
you know.
true.
So now it totally makes sense, you know, with the fish saying, particularly growing up on the Bayou, and we did a lot of fishing.
Oh, that's great. So listen, so this is one where I think it demonstrates the depth and breadth of our sort of national experience with colloquialisms and regionalisms and sayings, because until you shared this with me, I'd never heard this saying before. I'd never heard the saying. Never. Now, I grew up in a landlocked area. I'm from Nashville. Fishing is definitely part of people's experience and pastimes, just not really in my family. And we do have waterways there. The Cumberland River, Nashville is a river city. The Cumberland River runs right through it, and the Tennessee Valley Authority spent a lot of money to create some man-made lakes and dams. So there's a bunch of lakes, Old Hickory Lake, Percy Lake, anyway. But, you know, that just wasn't part of what we did as in terms of pastimes. So I love that, though, because I think it demonstrates how divergent the Southern experience is. And, you know, we are claiming this saying as a Southern saying. So that's a whole other thing. So if we say it, it's Southern.
It is Southern. Yes. Watch episode 1 to understand that.
More
yes,
about that,
yes.
right?
And if you see this and you say, oh, we said this X, let us know.
Let us know.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah. Let us know.
We
Yeah,
want to know. But
definitely.
this is one that, at least from my Mid-South Nashville experience, I never heard. So I love that, you know, and we expect that will happen, that there will be things that we are revealing and sharing about our particular areas of geography and the things that were said in our households that we can now pass on and hope that they proliferate. But I do love this concept of taking the good and leaving the bad behind.
Yeah.
And it's so,
that's the core of it.
You know, I think what I love about these types of sayings that many people attribute to Southern sayings and also to the Caribbean and to Africa is that they are so visual.
Yes.
And I think, you know, the use of the imagery is something that was really interrogated. So my doctorate is in English literature by Zora Neale Hurston. So Zora Neale Hurston was an anthropologist and did all of this sort of tracking of sayings from the South and from, you know, the Afro-Caribbean, and traced how we describe things in very graphic and visual terms, using imagery related to the flora and the fauna and nature and animals. And so I think this is a perfect example of that.
Well, you know, I love me some Zora Neale Hurston.
Yes, ma'am.
Because my baby girl is named Zora.
Absolutely.
And I went to school at Bethune-Cookman College, which is about 45 minutes away from Eatonville, Florida, where she was born. And I remember when I was in college, we used to go there. There was this big festival.
The Eatonville Day.
Yeah, and we would celebrate her. So, and of course, her literary work was a part of my academic matriculation when I was at Bethune-Cookman, because of course it had to be, right? Like, shame on the institution, right? We had to do it.
It better be.
Yes, yeah. So shout out to Zora Neale Hurston and all that she's contributed to the world. You know, what's interesting as we kind of really study and really live into really what her scholarship and her writing was, which is really being able to, you know, to trace back and really understand how these words and phrases influence our lives. You know, I think about how those words, you eat the meat or you eat the fish and you spit out the bones, how I interpret that or internalize that at every age and stage of my life, right? So, of course, as a child, you hear it, and I grew up hearing it all the time. But I'm not sure that I was able to truly implement the words of what it meant until I got into my late 20s, maybe early 30s, right? And so just to think about this of how words have meaning and have impact, right? A phrase that I grew up with hearing all that time, but the ability to be able to act on it took up to 15, 20 years
Interesting.
for me to be able to actually execute on. And there's a lot of, things that you can gather from that, maturity, right? But I think at the core of it is, these sayings are always interacting with society and the social pressures that are around you. And so the people in my lives, the women in my life had the wherewithal to plant this seed in me. However, sometimes the circumstances wouldn't allow us to be able to execute on it, right? And so as you get older, as you get more refined in your thoughts, as you get more nuanced in how you manage situations, I started little by little being able to really nuance the words that people gave to me, and then be able to give myself permission to hold on to those things that made sense for me and let go of the things that didn't. And even, I may get in trouble on this, Aisha.
Drum roll.
I know.
Right?
But even in a theological context, seminary really was the place that gave me permission to take words from my childhood and really be able to actualize them, right? Even in my faith, because there were plenty of things that I grew up with, some beautiful that shaped my life in such a dynamic way. But there were other things from my religious experience. I was like, whoa, I'm not sure if I want to hold on to that.
There's something awry here.
Yeah, we're not doing that. And so, it was really theological training that gave me permission to be able to build on the skills that were already there, right? And it's interesting. I know when we were talking about this podcast, we talked about how the academy has these disciplines and is seen as the place that you go to be able to access these words of wisdom or these frameworks to be able to set you up for success in your professional life. And so for me, it was realizing that, okay, I'm paying a whole lot of money for this education when, the grandmamas and aunties and all those people around me gave me similar things.
Yes.
It just wasn't in fancy words.
It was articulated differently.
As I did in the ivory tower. So, it's really interesting. That phrase means so much to me as it relates to the evolution of my growth and development. And I'm really curious, even though it is your first time, interacting with it, I'm really curious, how does it sit with you?
Well, I think that, we do have to learn how to navigate and negotiate a lot of incoming messages and information in leadership. And the parts that resonate with us are sometimes, honestly, not the messages that should hold the most meaning, but they could sometimes be the ones that are the most problematic, and yet we wrestle with those longer because they're stirring up, something in us, whether we think it's unjustified criticism of our work or our style or, unwelcome kind of attacks on institutions that we care about, whether or not we work for those institutions. So, when I hear it, I do think about ways that I've evolved as a leader over the past, 3 to 5 years in particular, which is almost that you want to challenge yourself to engage a different phrase here, to keep your friends close and your enemies closer, which is, if I am in situations where I'm hearing things that are rubbing me the wrong way, I do think it is a good exercise to sit with that and say, is there any part of this that has a kernel of truth?
Yeah.
Either there is or there isn't, but I think it gets to this piece, eat the meat and spit out the bones. Is there some meat there? And it's worth thinking about. And either if there isn't, then how do we honestly let it go? Kind of bury the part and say, you know what, they might have been going through something, or
Right.
they didn't have full information, or they shared something and that was their opinion, but that doesn't mean I have to act on any of it whatsoever. It can go in one ear and out the other. So, those are the ways I think that it's striking me, as a phrase that could be applied to my experience. I think the other thing about it is that in the context of thinking through things that might, or experiences that might have been, that we might have lived through where we didn't have the agency that we do now, I honestly think that to be able to apply that phrase takes a level of maturity and forgiveness.
Absolutely.
And reflection, like being willing to go back and actually think about, is there any meat to chew on whatsoever, or was that honestly all bone?
Yeah.
And sometimes there could just be crap experiences where, they're really, that was a valley moment, and I really would rather have not done that. I would rather not have had that experience. So I think there's lots of different ways to kind of think about it and roll it, around. But for this moment, I'm particularly thinking of, the context of being in senior leadership roles and just having to navigate a lot of incoming suggestions and thoughts and ideas. But knowing ultimately you got to have your trusted sources and validators.
Yeah.
And outside of those folks, not that you want to live in an echo chamber, but I do think we have to be super careful about what words we're letting influence us and which ones we're letting just, bounce off of us. Like, what is that saying? Like water rolls off a duck's back.
Yeah. Is that's going to be a phrase for another show?
That might be like
Yeah.
that.
I think the key word, Aisha, is really the maturity. And I think sometimes we take for granted, that there's an evolution of growth for a human being, just in general, that then allows you to be able to navigate and manage complex situations, right? And so, the meat piece, that could be things that are edifying, that makes you feel good, as well as those things that make you pause and reevaluate. And I think the maturity piece that comes in is the ability to be able to manage or give credence to both those things that make us feel good with feedback, as well as those things that make us pause. Because if you are ambitious, which I think both of us fall into that category.
I think so. We got to own it. We got to own it.
You got to own your stuff, right?
Here we are doing this podcast. We need another thing.
Like we need another thing. But sometimes with that ambition, you get so driven, and there's ego involved. It is what it is. Like if you are ambitious, there's a piece of that you have to navigate and deal with. And I don't see ego as a bad thing. I think it's something that you have to manage and something that you have to check. But sometimes the ego gets in the way of your ability to really be able to take a step back and be able to really chew on that fish or that meat that isn't so good, right? Because we want people to see us in a good light, right? We want to be able to be that go-to person with the advice. And very rarely for people that are ambitious or people in leadership, the grace of being able to make mistakes. And man, living in a 21st century cancel culture, like that's a whole nother layer of pressure. So to have the maturity to be able to sit with oneself in any context, whatever the situation, and be able to chew on that meat that feels good and chew on that meat that makes us uncomfortable, and the ability to spit out both. Because sometimes I think the assumption is, oh, all the good stuff you just chew and you want to keep. But that's not always the case. You really have to manage that too, because sometimes that can lead you down a path that may not be beneficial as well.
Yeah, well, we have to be able to have to kind of look at ourselves as much as we, to the extent that we can, from a perspective of objectivity.
Yes.
But one of the things that what you said just triggered for me is, in a literal sense, the idea that, there is a life or death element to this phrase, which is spitting out the bones, because bones will choke you.
They will.
And they can choke you. And we have in our family, let's see, how do I say, my mother's godparents, who were also her aunt and uncle, lost a child in infancy to choking on fishbone. And so I think, that, and I remember as a child realizing that my Aunt B and Uncle Ben had a son who I never knew. It's like, well, who, we were looking through family pictures, like, who is that? And they had a daughter named Maddie B. It's like, who is that? That's not Maddie B. It's like, oh, that was her brother who died in infancy. And I didn't know that. I was like, oh, that's so sad.
Yeah.
But I do think that we are all dealing with things that, have the potential to either, it could kill a dream, it could kill a part of ourselves, like, once you pop a balloon, you cannot put it back. It could be, the perspective or perception of a person that we grew up with, like, oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Aisha, you preaching up in here, girl.
I did not know that.
You're saying a word.
So I didn't know that about that person.
Yeah.
And so, whether or not we can manage to eat carefully, to digest that information carefully, is important.
It is important.
It's, it's life or death out here in terms of the information flow and what
Absolutely.
we're hearing and what we're dealing with on a daily basis. So, that's something that, what you just shared made me think of, like, oh, of course you have to spit out the bones, because eating them could literally choke you.
Yeah. And particularly that resonate in this 21st century world we live in. Mm-hmm. I think about, we're both moms, and it's scary sometimes thinking about the level of access that our children have at such a young age to just diverse information sources that at times, as protective as we are, and we both are,
yeah,
that we're not going to be able to control it all the time, right? And so all of that is, they don't even know it, and a lot of people don't know it, quite frankly. They are internalizing and eating things that may have bones in them. Mm-hmm. And the ability to have the maturity to be able to recognize when it's not something that they should consume, it's really delicate in a 21st century society to be able to figure out, when do you spit it out, right? It's really complex. So it's something that is a skill set that needs to be nurtured, developed, revisited, time and time again, because you're right, it is life or death, because one thing that we've learned living through a pandemic is that life is fragile, not just our physical health, but the mental health that everybody went through by being in lockdown for so long. So being able to manage both is really important, and being able to recognize when you're chewing on good nourishment, good fish, good meat, or, and for the vegetarians out there, good vegetables.
Something, chew something and throw out the seeds. Right?
Spit out the seeds, right? We can adapt. We're flexible. We're inclusive here on Chili Grits Podcast.
Exactly. Well, thank you for
it's really important.
This phrase, this saying, from your particular heritage. It's been a pleasure to really dive into it with you.
Yeah, so more to come, and we hope that you are enjoying Chili Grits Podcast as much as we are.
Absolutely.
And tune in for our next episode.
And send us some of your sayings.
Yes, send us some sayings.
We might consider bringing them up for episodes in the future.
Indeed. Thanks so much.
Bye, y'all.